Just when Meghan Markle thought she had finally escaped the shadow of her royal past, the walls came crashing down around her in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The timing could not have been worse. As the Duchess of Sussex prepared to unveil her holiday special on Netflix, positioning herself as the ultimate warm and welcoming homemaker, a bombshell interview dropped that threatened to obliterate everything she had worked so desperately to build. Former palace aide Jason Knauf, the very man who first raised the alarm about her alleged treatment of staff back in 2018, decided to break his silence in the most public way possible. He sat down with 60 Minutes Australia and delivered words that sent shockwaves through royal circles and Hollywood alike. When asked if he had any regrets about the accusations he lodged against Meghan years ago, his answer was chilling in its simplicity. He said he would not change a thing. Let that sink in for a moment. The man at the center of the original bullying allegations, someone who worked closely with both Meghan and Prince Harry during their time as senior working royals, looked straight into the camera and doubled down on every single claim he ever made. This was not some anonymous source hiding behind tabloid protection. This was a named individual with first-hand knowledge willing to stake his reputation on the truth of his allegations. But here is where the story takes an even more explosive turn. Royal insiders are absolutely convinced that Knauf would never have agreed to this interview without explicit approval from Prince William himself. The two men remain incredibly close. Knauf still works with William on the Earthshot Prize, one of the prince's most cherished projects. The idea that he would go rogue and speak publicly about such a sensitive matter without consulting the future king is simply unthinkable. So what does this tell us about where things really stand between the Waleses and the Sussexes? It tells us that the war is far from over. It tells us that while Harry and Meghan have been busy trying to reinvent themselves as California philanthropists and lifestyle gurus, the palace has been quietly keeping receipts. And now, at the precise moment when Meghan needed positive press more than ever, those receipts are being cashed in. The December release of her holiday special was supposed to cement her transformation from controversial royal escapee to beloved domestic goddess. Instead, she found herself battling headlines about alleged workplace terror, while trying to convince audiences that she is the epitome of warmth and hospitality. The contrast could not be more damaging. On one screen, she arranges flowers and bakes cookies with celebrity friends. On another, former colleagues describe her as someone who left them needing therapy. This is the nightmare scenario that Meghan's team has been dreading for years. The allegations that haunted her exit from royal life have followed her across the Atlantic and refused to die. But the revelations are only just beginning, and what comes next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the Duchess of Sussex. The 60 Minutes Australia interview was nothing short of extraordinary. For years, Jason Knauf had remained largely silent, letting his original email speak for itself, while the world debated whether Meghan Markle was a victim or a villain. But in February of 2025, he stepped out of the shadows and into the glaring spotlight of international television, and what he said left absolutely no room for misinterpretation. When the interviewer asked him directly about finding himself at the center of such a massive public controversy, Knauf responded with remarkable composure. He acknowledged that being in the spotlight was tough, but suggested it was probably quite good for him. He explained that as someone who spent years helping other people navigate public attention, he had to be willing to take his own medicine. There was no defensiveness in his voice, no hint of regret or second-guessing. This was a man completely at peace with the decisions he made. But the real bombshell came when he was pressed on whether he stood by his original allegations against Meghan. His answer was devastating for the Duchess. He stated plainly that he would not change anything, not a single word, not a single accusation. After years of Meghan and Harry dismissing his claims as part of a coordinated smear campaign, Knauf looked the world in the eye and confirmed that he meant every syllable of what he wrote back in 2018. Royal experts immediately pointed out what many had already suspected. British commentator Hilary Fordwich told Fox News that Knauf would never have agreed to the interview without first consulting and gaining approval from Prince William. She emphasized that the two men remain incredibly close and continue working together on the Earthshot Awards. The implication was crystal clear. This was not a rogue former employee going off script. This was a calculated move with backing from the highest levels of the royal household. The timing made the message even more pointed. Meghan's Netflix series With Love, Meghan had premiered in March, and her team was already promoting the upcoming holiday special. She was in the middle of a carefully orchestrated image rehabilitation campaign designed to make the world forget about her turbulent exit from royal life. And then right in the middle of this charm offensive, Knauf appeared on television to remind everyone exactly why so many former staff members reportedly called themselves the Sussex Survivors Club. What made the interview even more damaging was Knauf's measured tone. He was not ranting or bitter. He spoke fondly of working on Harry and Meghan's wedding, describing it as an amazing and magical experience. He said he wished them absolutely all the best with their lovely family, but those pleasantries only made his refusal to retract the bullying allegations more powerful. This was clearly a man who had positive memories of certain moments but remained utterly convinced that what he witnessed and reported was the truth. And the revelations from his original complaint are even more disturbing than many people realize. To truly understand the gravity of what Jason Knauf revealed, we need to go back to October of 2018, just 5 months after Meghan Markle married Prince Harry in what was supposed to be a fairy tale wedding. Behind the glittering facade of royal life, something deeply troubling was allegedly unfolding inside the walls of Kensington Palace, and Knauf felt compelled to document it in an explosive internal email. The email was addressed to Simon Case, who at the time served as Prince William's private secretary. Knauf did not mince words. He wrote that he was very concerned that the Duchess was able to bully 2 personal assistants out of the household in the past year. Think about that for a moment. This was not gossip whispered in palace corridors. This was a formal complaint lodged by a senior communications official to another high-ranking palace executive. It was put in writing with full knowledge that it would become part of the official record. But Knauf did not stop there. His email painted a picture of a woman who allegedly could not exist without a target. He wrote that the Duchess seemed intent on always having someone in her sights. He accused her of bullying a staff member he identified only as Y, and claimed she was actively seeking to undermine this person's confidence. The language was stark and unambiguous. There was no hedging or diplomatic softening of the accusations. Knauf went on to describe report after report from people who had witnessed what he called unacceptable behavior toward this staff member. This suggested the problem was not isolated to 1 or 2 incidents, but represented a pattern of conduct that multiple palace employees had observed and felt troubled enough to discuss with their superiors. The picture emerging was one of a workplace environment that had become toxic under Meghan's presence. The email remained buried within palace files for nearly 3 years before journalist Valentine Lowe obtained it and published the contents in the Times of London in March of 2021. The timing of that leak was significant. It came just days before Harry and Meghan's blockbuster interview with Oprah Winfrey was set to air, an interview in which they would level devastating accusations against the royal family. Many interpreted the leak as the palace firing a warning shot, reminding the world that the Sussexes were not the only ones with damaging stories to tell. Meghan's team immediately went on the offensive, dismissing the allegations as a calculated smear campaign designed to undermine her credibility before the Oprah interview. Her lawyers insisted it was simply not true that she was a bully, though they added the curious caveat that she would not want to negate anyone's personal experiences. That carefully worded statement left considerable room for interpretation and did little to silence her critics. The palace announced an investigation into the allegations, but what happened next only deepened the mystery surrounding the entire affair. If Meghan Markle hoped the bullying allegations would fade into distant memory once she settled into her California lifestyle, January of 2025 delivered a brutal reality check. Vanity Fair, one of the most prestigious publications in American media, dropped an 8,000-word exposé that ripped apart the carefully curated image she had spent years constructing. And this time, she could not blame the British tabloids. The article, titled American Hustle, was based on months of interviews with dozens of sources close to the Sussexes. Many spoke anonymously, because they had been forced to sign strict non-disclosure agreements, but their accounts painted a devastating portrait of life inside Meghan's orbit. The allegations that emerged were not rehashed palace gossip. These were fresh claims from people who had worked with her in America, on her Spotify podcast and Netflix projects, suggesting the pattern of behavior had followed her across the Atlantic. One source described Meghan's treatment of staff as really awful. They explained that employees could be thrown to the wolves at any given moment if they fell out of favor. Another insider compared the experience to being trapped in the movie Mean Girls, describing behavior that included talking behind your back and gnawing at your sense of self. The comparison to teenage bullying tactics was particularly damning for a woman who had positioned herself as a champion of female empowerment. Perhaps most troubling were the revelations about the toll this alleged behavior took on those who worked with her. The article reported that a colleague connected to her Archetypes podcast took a leave of absence after working on just 3 episodes before leaving the company entirely. Several others reportedly took extended breaks, quit their positions, or underwent long-term therapy after their experiences. These were not minor workplace disagreements. These were claims of psychological damage requiring professional intervention. One source who had initially been skeptical of the original palace bullying allegations admitted their perspective changed completely after working with Meghan. They confessed that the kind of behavior described in those early reports happened on any given Tuesday. The casual nature of that statement suggested this was not occasional friction, but a regular pattern of conduct that staff simply had to endure. What made the Vanity Fair piece so damaging was its source. This was not a conservative outlet with an axe to grind, or a British tabloid with a history of Sussex hostility. The author was Anna Peel, a respected journalist who had previously written for the New York Times and New York Magazine. She lived in Manhattan and operated entirely outside the ecosystem that Harry and Meghan had spent years denouncing as their enemies. The timing was catastrophic. The article landed just as Meghan was preparing to launch her Netflix lifestyle series, poisoning the warm homemaker image before audiences even had a chance to watch the first episode. But Vanity Fair was not the only American outlet turning against her. For years, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry had a convenient defense against every negative story that emerged about their conduct. They blamed the British tabloid press, painting themselves as victims of a racist and vindictive media establishment that had been determined to destroy them from the moment they announced their relationship. But in September of 2024, that defense crumbled spectacularly when The Hollywood Reporter published its own damning investigation. This was not some obscure publication with questionable motives. The Hollywood Reporter is the entertainment industry's paper of record, a trusted source that executives, agents, and talent rely on for accurate insider information. When they reported that sources described Meghan as terrifying, the accusation carried enormous weight in the circles where she desperately needed to be taken seriously. The details that emerged were brutal. One insider told the publication that everyone was terrified of the Duchess. They claim she belittles people and refuses to take advice. Another source went even further, describing her as someone who marches around like a dictator in high heels, fuming and barking orders. They alleged witnessing her reduce grown men to tears. These were not vague accusations, but vivid descriptions of specific behavioral patterns that painted a picture of workplace tyranny. The article also highlighted the revolving door of staff departures that had plagued the Sussex operation since they arrived in America. Former employees reportedly formed what they called the Sussex Survivors Club, a darkly humorous name that spoke volumes about their shared experiences. The nickname had first surfaced in Valentine Lowe's book about palace life, but its continued use among American staff suggested the problems had not been left behind in London. Perhaps most damaging was the characterization of Prince Harry himself. While sources described him as charming and lacking any airs, they also labeled him an enabler, who stood by while his wife allegedly mistreated those around them. One source claimed they were both poor decision-makers who changed their minds frequently. The portrait was of a dysfunctional operation led by two people fundamentally unsuited to running a professional enterprise. Journalist Valentine Lowe, who first broke the palace bullying story, told Newsweek the Hollywood Reporter allegations had glaring and fascinating echoes of everything he and others had previously written about Meghan. He noted that regardless of how one interpreted the reports, a clear pattern had emerged. She was either a demanding boss or a difficult one, and the demands she made of people may not always reflect what was possible. Meghan's team attempted damage control by arranging glowing testimonials in Us Weekly from current and former employees. But the counter-programming felt desperate, and critics noted that paid staff offering praise hardly neutralized the anonymous accounts of those who had nothing to gain by speaking out. The narrative had shifted permanently. This was no longer a story about British media persecution. American publications were now documenting the same troubling patterns, and her usual excuses no longer applied. The entire point of With Love, Meghan was to make America fall in love with a softer, gentler version of the Duchess of Sussex. Gone was the activist lecturing audiences about social justice. In her place stood a cashmere-clad homemaker arranging flowers, harvesting honey from her beehives, and baking treats alongside celebrity friends. It was a calculated transformation designed to distance her from the controversies of her royal past and reposition her as someone viewers would actually want to invite into their homes. The Netflix series premiered in March of 2025 after being delayed from its original January launch due to the devastating Los Angeles wildfires. Meghan filmed at a farmhouse near her Montecito estate, creating a dreamy aesthetic of rustic luxury that seemed worlds away from palace intrigue. She welcomed famous guests including Chrissy Teigen, celebrity chefs, and lifestyle experts, all while projecting an image of effortless warmth and hospitality. But critics savaged the production from the moment it dropped. The Guardian gave it just 1 star out of 5, with reviewer Chitra Ramaswamy describing it as vacuous and joyless despite all the styled perfection. Stuart Heritage, also writing for The Guardian, called the show pointless filler. The Economist questioned why Netflix had awarded Meghan a reported $100 million deal for content they deemed out of touch with ordinary viewers. The disconnect between the persona she was selling and the allegations swirling around her could not have been more stark. On screen, she giggled with friends and demonstrated how to create beautiful table settings. Off-screen, reports described former employees seeking therapy after working with her. On screen, she radiated approachability and kindness. Off-screen, sources called her terrifying and accused her of reducing grown men to tears. Her holiday special, which dropped on December 3rd, was meant to capitalize on the seasonal goodwill and cement her transformation into a beloved domestic figure. Instead, it arrived under the shadow of the Knauf interview and the mountain of negative press that had accumulated throughout the year. Critics continued their assault. and while some loyal fans praised the festive content, the broader public remained deeply skeptical of the warmth she was projecting. Industry insiders began whispering that Netflix viewed the holiday special as the closing credits on their relationship with the Sussexes. Reports emerged suggesting the streaming giant had quietly axed any plans for future seasons despite the extended deal announced just months earlier. The numbers told a brutal story. While the first season had cracked the top 10 in some countries, viewership was a fraction of Netflix's genuine hits. The show ranked 383rd among all Netflix productions in the first half of 2025 with just over 5 million views. Meghan had gambled everything on reinventing herself as America's favorite homemaker, but you cannot convince audiences you are warm and welcoming when headlines keep reminding them about the people who allegedly needed professional help after working for you. When the bullying allegations first became public in March of 2021, Buckingham Palace announced it would launch an independent investigation into the claims. Staff members who had worked with Meghan during her time as a senior royal would be interviewed, evidence would be gathered, and the truth would finally emerge. At least that was what the public was led to believe. What actually happened remains one of the most frustrating mysteries in recent royal history. The investigation was conducted privately, away from media scrutiny, with the palace promising a thorough examination of the allegations. Former aide Samantha Cohen confirmed in an interview with an Australian newspaper that she was among approximately 10 staffers questioned about their experiences working with the Duchess. The scope appeared comprehensive, suggesting palace officials were taking the matter seriously and gathering substantial testimony. Then came the stunning announcement in 2022. The palace revealed that the investigation had been completed, but declared that the findings would never be released to the public. The only statement offered was maddeningly vague. A source told the Daily Beast that recommendations would be taken forward and lessons had been learned. No specifics were provided about what those recommendations entailed or what lessons exactly had been absorbed. The decision to bury the report sparked immediate speculation about what it might contain. Some royal watchers believed the findings were damaging enough to Meghan that releasing them would have constituted an act of war against the Sussexes, potentially provoking retaliation through their media platforms. Others suggested the opposite, theorizing that the report may have exonerated Meghan and the palace suppressed it to avoid giving her a public relations victory. But a third theory emerged that offered perhaps the most compelling explanation for the secrecy. Author Andrew Lowney, in his biography of Prince Andrew, titled Entitled, claimed that after Meghan was accused of bullying staff, Buckingham Palace braced itself for historic complaints about Prince Andrew's own alleged bullying, profanities, and impossible demands. Some sources suggested the report on Meghan was never released because doing so would have raised uncomfortable questions about the behavior of the disgraced Duke of York. This theory gained traction among royal observers who noted the palace's long history of protecting Andrew despite his mounting scandals. If the investigation into Meghan had established certain standards for acceptable workplace conduct, releasing those findings might have created a precedent that could be weaponized against other family members with far worse alleged behavior. Harry and Meghan reportedly expressed disappointment that the findings were never made public, which many interpreted as confidence that they would have been cleared. Their camp has consistently maintained that the allegations were fabricated as part of a coordinated smear campaign, but the palace's refusal to either confirm or deny their version of events has allowed the controversy to fester indefinitely. The unanswered questions surrounding this investigation continue to haunt Meghan, and someone very powerful has made clear exactly where he stands on the matter. If there was any doubt about where Prince William stood on the bullying allegations against his sister-in-law, his actions in April of 2025 removed all ambiguity. Just weeks after Jason Knauf's explosive 60 Minutes Australia interview reignited the controversy, William announced that Knauf would be appointed as the new chief executive officer of the Earthshot Prize. The message could not have been clearer if it had been written in neon lights across Buckingham Palace. Royal commentators immediately recognized the significance of the appointment. A colleague of Knauf who had worked with him at the palace told the Daily Beast that Jason had proved his loyalty to William and was being rewarded. They emphasized that Knauf had been caught in the middle of a very nasty situation with Meghan and simply told the truth. The source described him as one of the good guys, leaving no room for interpretation about which side of the conflict the palace stood on. British commentator Hilary Fordwich spelled out the implications with brutal clarity. She stated that William's decision to elevate Cring Mouf confirmed the bullying allegations were being treated as totally legitimate from the very top. She argued that if there were any doubts about whether Meghan was everything she was alleged to be as a bully, then this interview would never have been approved by Prince William in the first place. The appointment was particularly significant, given the Earthshot Prize's importance to William personally. Launched in 2020, the initiative represents his flagship environmental project and reflects his vision for the type of king he hopes to become. Entrusting its leadership to Knauf demonstrates not only professional confidence but also deep personal trust. This was not a ceremonial position offered as a quiet thank you. This was placing a man accused of orchestrating a smear campaign by Sussex supporters at the helm of William's most cherished legacy project. For Harry, watching his brother reward the man who formally accused his wife of bullying must have been devastating. The two brothers were once inseparable, presenting a united front as the future of the modern monarchy. Now they find themselves on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide, with William effectively choosing palace staff over his own flesh and blood. Royal experts have speculated about whether any path to reconciliation remains possible. When Knauf was asked this question during his 60 Minutes interview, his answer was diplomatic but hardly encouraging. He acknowledged that even when you love someone, you can have ups and downs, and described this chapter as very hard for William. When pressed on whether Harry might eventually find his way back, Knauf said he could not speculate on the future. The subtext was unmistakable. As long as Harry remains married to Meghan, the gates of the palace will stay firmly closed. William has drawn a line in the sand, and every action he takes reinforces the message that there will be no forgiveness until there is accountability. But the pattern of allegations continues to expand beyond royal circles. What makes the bullying allegations against Meghan Markle so damaging is not any single accusation, but the relentless consistency of the complaints across different continents, industries, and time periods. From Kensington Palace to Spotify to Netflix, the same troubling themes keep emerging no matter where she goes or who she works with. At some point, the coincidence defense becomes impossible to sustain. The pattern began during her brief 18 months as a senior working royal. Staff members allegedly left in tears. Personal assistants reportedly fled the household entirely. Jason Knauf felt compelled to lodge a formal complaint documenting what he witnessed. The palace was concerned enough to launch an official investigation. These were not tabloid inventions, but internal responses to real workplace concerns raised by actual employees. When the Sussexes relocated to California and signed their massive Spotify deal, hopes emerged that a fresh start might produce different results. Instead, the streaming giant eventually parted ways with the couple after producing just one podcast series. Executive Bill Simmons publicly called them grifters who did not produce content. Reports emerged of frustration within Spotify about the Sussexes' demands and the difficulty of working with their operation. The Netflix experience followed a similar trajectory. Despite a reported $100 million deal, content production has been minimal and fraught with complications. The Vanity Fair expose detailed how staff members working on Meghan's projects allegedly experienced the same patterns described by palace employees years earlier. Warm initial relationships would curdle when things went wrong, with whoever was perceived as responsible facing cold treatment and professional exile. The Hollywood Reporter investigation added further weight to the pattern. American entertainment industry sources, entirely disconnected from British media or palace politics, described Meghan in terms that echoed the original allegations almost word for word: terrifying, belittling, dictatorial. These descriptors came from Hollywood insiders who had no stake in protecting the British monarchy and no history with the Sussex tabloid wars. Meghan's defenders have consistently dismissed each wave of allegations as coordinated attacks driven by racism, jealousy, or loyalty to the palace. They point to the non-disclosure agreements that prevent many former employees from speaking publicly, arguing this proves the complaints are manufactured rather than genuine. Supporters highlight testimonials from friends and current staff who describe her as kind, generous, and deeply misunderstood. But the geographic and professional diversity of the accusers makes the smear campaign narrative increasingly difficult to maintain. British palace aides and American podcast producers do not share WhatsApp groups coordinating anti-Meghan messaging. Hollywood executives and royal household staff do not attend the same dinner parties plotting her downfall. The simplest explanation for why similar complaints keep emerging from entirely different environments is that the behavior being described actually exists. Valentine Lowe, who has tracked these allegations longer than almost anyone, noted that a clear pattern had emerged of someone who is either a demanding boss or a difficult one. Whatever interpretation one prefers, the consistency of the complaints cannot be ignored. The bullying allegations that have haunted Meghan Markle for nearly 7 years show no signs of fading into history. If anything, 2025 has demonstrated that the controversy will continue resurfacing at the most inconvenient moments, threatening to derail every attempt she makes to rehabilitate her public image. And the worst may still be yet to come. Journalist Valentine Lowe, the man who first exposed the Knauf email in 2021, has a new book scheduled for release in September of 2025, titled Power in the Palace. The publication promises to lift the lid on the mysterious power dynamics at the heart of the British state. Given Lowe's history of breaking damaging stories about Meghan, royal watchers are bracing for fresh revelations that could reignite the entire controversy, just as memories of the current firestorm begin to fade. Meanwhile, Meghan's Netflix future appears increasingly uncertain. Industry insiders have reportedly described her holiday special as the closing credits on the streaming giant's relationship with the Sussexes. Despite announcements of an extended deal, whispers suggest the partnership has been quietly axed behind the scenes. The viewership numbers simply do not justify the investment. Her lifestyle series ranked an embarrassing 383rd among all Netflix productions in the first half of the year, a humiliating performance for content that allegedly cost tens of millions to produce. Her lifestyle brand, as ever, continues attempting to gain traction, with seasonal product drops and promotional partnerships, but the shadow of the bullying allegations makes corporate relationships treacherous. Brands are increasingly cautious about associating with controversial figures, and Meghan's inability to escape the difficult boss narrative creates ongoing reputational risk for potential partners. The situation with the royal family remains frozen in permanent hostility. Prince William has made his position unmistakably clear through his continued support of Jason Knauf and his refusal to engage with reconciliation efforts. King Charles reportedly maintains some contact with Harry, but has shown no willingness to publicly defend Meghan against the allegations. The institution she once accused of failing to protect her now seems content watching her struggle without offering assistance. Harry himself appears increasingly isolated. Reports describe him as lost and out of his depth, a man who traded his birthright for a California dream that has delivered far less than promised. Whether he privately questions the choices that led him here remains unknown, but the path back to his former life grows more overgrown with each passing year. For Meghan, the question is no longer whether she can escape the bullying allegations, but whether she can build a successful career despite them. Every project she launches will be shadowed by headlines about former employees needing therapy. Every warm smile on camera will be contrasted with reports of staff reduced to tears. The woman who wanted to be beloved by millions finds herself trapped in a narrative she cannot control, facing accusations that refuse to die no matter how many jars of jam she sells or holiday specials she films. Drop your thoughts below, like, subscribe, and stay tuned. The next video is waiting, and you won't believe what is coming next.